Someone get the janitor to mop up this coffee spill before she tracks it all over the command deck. We're running a war game here, not a custodial convention. The crowd of young, eager ensigns and lieutenants snickered. The woman in the simple gray coveralls didn't flinch, didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the insult in any way. Her hands, surprisingly steady and etched with fine, clean calluses, continued their methodical wipe down of a secondary console, her movements an exercise in practiced efficiency. She was a ghost in the room, a function, not a person in their eyes. But in the darkened upper tier of the observation deck, the visiting four-star admiral didn't laugh. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed not on the massive, shimmering screens depicting a naval battle group, but on her. He watched her posture, ramrod straight even as she knelt. He watched her hands, the way they moved with an economy of motion that spoke not of mundane labor, but of deeply ingrained discipline. He saw a faint, silvery scar that traced the line of her temple, a map of some forgotten history. The admiral saw what they all missed, the calm in the center of the storm. He saw a professional. If you believe that true respect is earned in silence, not shouted from a pedestal, type competence below. The air in the Aegis Combat Information Center simulator was thick with the scent of ozone and manufactured tension. It was the Navy's billion-dollar cathedral to digital warfare, a place where careers were forged or broken in the crucible of photons and algorithms. Commander Davies, the officer in charge of the exercise, paced the central platform like a preening peacock. He was a man whose confidence far outstripped his competence, a fact known to many but spoken by none. He continued his performance for the admiral, his voice booming with false authority. We demand a higher standard here. Absolute focus. This is a Tier 1 stress test of our carrier strike group's defensive capabilities. There is no room for civilian distractions, no place for people who don't understand the gravity of our mission. His eyes flicked pointedly toward the woman, who was now rising to her feet. She moved with a quiet grace, her simple work boots making no sound on the polished floor. Her silence was her shield, but to Davies, it was an admission of insignificance. He saw her as part of the background, furniture that happened to be breathing. See, he announced to the room, a sneer twisting his lips. Not a word. Probably couldn't tell a cruiser from a coffee pot. Just knows how to use a spray bottle and a rag. The final insult hung in the air, unchallenged. The complicit silence of the junior officers was its own form of applause. They saw a janitor. He saw a target for his ego. The admiral saw a loaded weapon. The simulation began with a deafening klaxon. The main screen, a wall of serene blue, erupted into a blizzard of angry red icons. Vampire, 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 a sensor operator screamed, his voice cracking. Multiple inbound threats, bearing 090, Mach 3+. It was a nightmare scenario, a perfectly coordinated saturation attack designed to overwhelm the fleet's defenses. The room, once a stage for Davies' arrogance, transformed into a cauldron of rising panic. The elite, hand-picked team, the very best the surface warfare community had to offer, began to fracture under the pressure. Their communications dissolved into a frantic crosstalk of failure. I can't get a fire control lock. The ECM is too strong. Multiple ghost signatures. They're spoofing our radar. Aegis is down. Repeat, we've lost the entire Aegis combat system. Commander Davies stood frozen, his face ashen. The swagger was gone, replaced by the stark terror of a man watching his career evaporate in real time. On the main screen, the digital icon for the flagship, the USS Olympus, was bracketed by inbound missile warnings. Its defenses were crippled, its lifeblood bleeding away in a cascade of system failure alerts. The admiral remained motionless on the observation deck, his face a mask of granite. He watched the breakdown, not of the technology, but of the men. He saw their training fail, their processes collapse, and their confidence shatter against the unforgiving logic of the attack. The symphony of alarms was the sound of their utter and complete defeat. But amidst the crescendo of chaos, there was a single point of absolute calm. The woman in the gray coveralls had not left the room. She stood near an auxiliary systems console, her back to the panicked operators. Her gaze wasn't on the main screen's dramatic display of failure, but on a smaller monitor showing raw data streams, a waterfall of incomprehensible code. Then, she moved. It wasn't a hurried or panicked motion. It was fluid, deliberate, and imbued with an unshakable sense of purpose. She slid into the unoccupied chair at the auxiliary console, her posture perfect. Her hands, the same hands Davies had mocked, descended upon the keyboard. They didn't just type. They flew, a blur of precise, economical movements that were both beautiful and terrifying to behold. A black window with green text, a raw command line interface, suddenly bloomed on the main screen, overriding all the failure notices. Her fingers danced across the keys, inputting lines of code with a speed that seemed physically impossible. She wasn't just operating the system. She was performing open-heart surgery on its source code while it was still running. She manually purged the ghost signals, rerouted auxiliary power from a non-critical system to reboot the Aegis core, and hot-patched the corrupted targeting algorithm with a new, more elegant solution. The blaring alarms ceased. The frantic crosstalk died. The red icons of the inbound missiles vanished, each one replaced by the green symbol of a successful intercept. The storm of chaos was gone, replaced by a profound, deafening silence. On the screen, the USS Olympus floated in a sea of tranquil blue, completely unharmed. The entire multi-billion-dollar war game, and the careers of everyone in the room, had been saved in 97 seconds. The silence that fell over the command center was heavier than any sound. It was a vacuum, filled with the weight of shattered assumptions and raw disbelief. The operators, moments before on the verge of total collapse, now stared at the pristine tactical display, their mouths hanging open. Commander Davies swiveled his head from the flawless screen to the woman at the console, his face a canvas of confusion and shock. "Who? What? How did you do that?" he stammered, his voice a pathetic whisper. The arrogance had been scoured from him, leaving only a hollowed-out shell of a man. From the observation deck, a single set of footsteps descended, each one echoing in the cavernous room like a judge's gavel. The admiral walked past the frozen operators, past the humiliated Davies, his eyes fixed on the woman in the gray coveralls. He stopped directly behind her chair. He did not address the commander. He spoke to her, and his voice was laced with a tone of deep, almost reverent respect that sent a fresh shockwave through the room. "It's been a long time." Echo for the first time, the woman turned her head, her calm, gray eyes meeting the admiral's. A flicker of recognition, a silent acknowledgement. "Admiral," she replied. Her voice was quiet, yet it carried an authority that filled the entire space. The admiral rested a hand on a nearby terminal. "Ensign," he commanded, his voice sharp as broken glass. "Pull up service record designation." Echo authorization code. Omega-01. The young officer at the station fumbled with the keyboard, his hands shaking as he entered the highest-level security clearance code he had ever seen. The tactical map on the main screen was replaced by a heavily redacted personnel file. There was no photograph, only stark, black-and-white text that scrolled with chilling finality. Designation: Echo status. Active, deep cover, specialization, asymmetric warfare, predictive threat analysis, live systems architecture. The list of her commendations was a sea of black censor bars, but the operational code names were legendary phantoms in the intelligence community: Silent Talon, Ghost Fleet, Project Mjolnir. Then came the final, devastating line of text. Note: original lead architect of the Aegis combat system simulation, Mark 7 through 9. The entire room took a collective, sharp intake of breath. She hadn't just used the system. She hadn't just hacked the system. She had built the system. The admiral turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the stunned crew, finally landing on the pale, sweating face of Commander Davies. His voice was no longer just authoritative, it was glacial. "Commander, you believed you were running a simulation. You were mistaken. You and your team were the simulation. She is the architect. She designed the ghost signatures that defeated you. She wrote the viral code that crashed your Aegis system. This entire exercise was a diagnostic she herself designed years ago to test for one critical system vulnerability: command arrogance." He then turned back to Echo. In front of the entire crew, the four-star admiral, a man who commanded fleets and advised presidents, drew himself to attention and rendered a slow, deliberate, perfect salute to the woman in the janitor's uniform. It was a gesture of profound respect that irrevocably reordered the universe for every person who witnessed it. "Ma'am," he said, the word landing with the force of a battleship's main gun. "Your diagnostic is complete. The system still has a human problem." The story of that day escaped the sealed confines of the simulation center not through an official report, but like a contagion, a whispered legend passed from one sailor to another across the global fleet. It was told in the hushed corridors of the Pentagon, in the crowded mess decks of destroyers in the South China Sea, and over encrypted channels between SEAL teams in undisclosed locations. They didn't call it the day the simulation crashed. They called it the Echo Protocol. It became a modern military fable, a potent parable about the terminal danger of underestimation. The tale of the quiet janitor who was secretly the ghost in the machine, the architect of their digital world who emerged from the shadows to remind them, in the most humbling way imaginable, that competence wears no specific uniform. Commander Davies was never the same. He wasn't court-martialed or publicly shamed. The admiral understood that true lessons are seared into the soul, not printed on a reprimand. The silent, soul-crushing humiliation of that moment had done more than any punishment could. It had broken him down and rebuilt him into something better. He became quieter, more observant. He started to truly see the sailors under his command, recognizing their worth not by the rank on their collar, but by the skill in their hands. He eventually became one of the most sought-after trainers in the Navy, renowned for an unorthodox first lesson where he would personally mop the classroom floor, telling the story of the day he insulted his own creator. The ripples of Echo's actions spread far beyond a single officer's redemption. The operators who had been in the room that day carried the experience with them for the rest of their careers. They were marked by it, infused with a new humility and a profound respect for the quiet professionals they encountered. They learned to listen to the silence, to look for the expertise hidden in the most unlikely of places. A new phrase entered the naval lexicon, becoming a common warning among operators: don't get echoed. It was a shorthand for a whole philosophy. Don't let your ego blind you. Don't mistake stillness for weakness, and never, ever assume you are the smartest person in the room. An anonymous hand pinned a grainy security camera still to the main briefing room's bulletin board. It was a simple, blurry image of a woman in gray coveralls, her back to the camera, her hands a blur over a keyboard. There was no name, no rank, no explanation needed. Everyone knew. It was a monument to a ghost, a silent, ever-present reminder that the most formidable person in any conflict is the one you never see coming, the one you dismiss at your own peril. Years turned into a decade. The technology in the Aegis simulator became faster, more complex, almost unrecognizable from the system that had crashed that fateful day. But the legend of Echo endured, becoming a foundational element of the institution's culture. Her story was now the first thing new recruits learned, a mandatory lesson in humility drilled into them before they ever touched a console. The moral was woven into the very fabric of their training. True strength is not measured in decibels, but in deeds. It is the victory of precision over posturing, of action over announcement. Echo's true legacy wasn't the millions of lines of code she had written. It was the institutional arrogance she had debugged with one quiet, decisive act. She had taught an entire generation of warriors that the most dangerous vulnerability isn't in the software, but in the human heart. The very console she had used was eventually decommissioned, too old to keep up with modern processing demands. But it wasn't sent to a scrap heap. Instead, it was polished and mounted in the main entrance hall of the training academy, a relic and a shrine. A small, unassuming brass plaque was affixed to its surface. It bore no name, no date, no commendation. It held only two words, a command and a philosophy that had redefined their understanding of strength. Assume nothing, it was a monument to a principle, a testament to a woman whose silence had become a roar that echoed through the decades. A permanent reminder of the immense power of showing, not telling. The story of Echo serves as an enduring reminder that our world is built and maintained by a legion of quiet professionals, masters of their craft hidden in plain sight. They are the grizzled mechanics who can diagnose a failing engine by its subtle vibration, the veteran nurses who can spot a life-threatening crisis in the flicker of an eyelid, the anonymous coders who weave the digital fabric of our lives from the shadows. They do not seek the spotlight. They do not require applause. Their validation comes from the work itself, from the flawless execution of a complex task, from the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved. They prove that a true legacy is not a name carved on a memorial, but a standard of excellence that inspires others to look deeper, to listen closer, and to respect the silence. They teach us that the most profound strength is often the most understated, and that real authority is not something you can claim, but something you are forced to recognize. The world is not changed by the loudest voice in the room, but by the steadiest hand. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption and where silent discipline defines true worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.